So thank you for joining today. So this session will be more focused towards the behavior change. As we all know that behavior change plays a major role when we are talking about the source reduction. So here we want to discuss like how can we change behavior of the people so that we can reduce the food waste at the source level. To, to begin with our today's session, we will have the video screening, which will be on the waste side story. So we can start the video play first, right? And followed by that, we will have the panel discussion. Then we have some kind of activities which Sweta and whole team has planned for all of us. So looking forward, now we will start with the video playing here. Yeah.
Food. And we're the world's largest producers of food. Producing, for example, 354 million tons of food grains and about 334 million tons of fruits and vegetables every year. That's a lot. And yet, 78.2 million tons of the food is just plain wasted by households alone. Some wasted on our plates, most never even reaching one. But क्यों? थोड़ा ignorance, थोड़ा lack of awareness और थोड़ा lack of planning की वजह से। अब आपकी इस रोटी को ही ले लो। खेत से निकली, प्यार से गूंदी, चूल्हे में सीखी, पर जब तुमने कहा नो नहीं नेवर, तो गई सीधा कचरे में। और ऐसी कई वेस्टेड रोटियों का बन गया पहाड़। But she's not alone. फ्रिज में रखी मदर डो, गलती से बाहर रह गया दूध, रोस्टेड वेजीज या रात का बचा हुआ राइस, सबका दी एंड यही लैंडफिल पर ही तो होता है। ट्रैजिक। जब फूड वेस्ट होता है तो साथ में वेस्ट होते हैं वो सारे रिसोर्सेस used to produce and transport this food to us, like soil nutrients, fuel, water, और इन सब लोगों की मेहनत। That's money, meals and meaning gone. और जब डेली इतना फूड वेस्ट होता है तो प्रेशर हमारे नेचुरल इकोसिस्टम पे भी होता है, क्योंकि बढ़ती पॉपुलेशन के लिए ज्यादा खाना उगाने का टारगेट और फिर उसे हम तक पहुंचाने की मेहनत दोनों करनी पड़ती है। रिजल्ट, सॉइल हेल्थ डिप्लीशन एंड डिक्रीजिंग वाटर लेवल्स। और अच्छे खासे खाने को वेस्ट करने का मतलब लॉस ऑफ अफोर्डेबल एंड न्यूट्रिशियस फूड फॉर ऑल ऑफ अस, व्हिच मींस फूड वेस्ट हमारे इनकम और हेल्थ के साथ साथ हमारे एनवायरनमेंट पर भी असर करता है। एक्सपर्ट्स कहते हैं बात जब फूड वेस्ट से इफेक्टिवली डील करने की हो तो ये सिंपल फूड रिकवरी हायरार्की याद रखो। शुरुआत से ही खाना ज्यादा ना बनाएं, डोनेट टू नीडी पीपल, फीड एनिमल्स, generating energy from the waste, composting, and finally dumping in the bin. In short, source reduction with extra focus or bin say extra distance. But can you really reduce food waste? Yes. And here's what you can do. Start with your own plate. जैसे मम्मी पापा कहते हैं जितना खा सको उतना ही प्लेट में लो। भूख ज्यादा हो तो पहली में एवरेस्ट मत बनाओ, दूसरी हेल्पिंग ले लो। बचा हुआ खाना फ्रिज में रखो या नेक्स्ट डे का मील बना लो। फिर भी खाना बचे तो नई रेसिपी ढूंढ लो और जब एक्स्ट्रा बन जाए तो किसी नीडी तक पहुंचा दो। So remember, your plate holds the power to build a better food future for India. Will you be our food waste champion, our change maker?
I hope you have enjoyed the short video on the food waste and what behavior change we are looking forward. So with this note, I will welcome our panel of experts and practitioners who will bring insights. Please join me in welcoming Luna Mishra, who is a lead corporate responsibility, Sodexo. She brings a unique perspective on sustainability by focusing on detailed and practical approaches used within business operations. Luna was awarded for the Performance of the Year in 2023 and received the Global Stop Hunger Award. Next, our panelist is Mandira Kalra. She is a senior campaign director and head of office of Purpose. Mandira has more than 20 years of experience in strategic and creative communication, specializes in narrative and behavior change across a diverse range of issues. She works closely with communities to co-create solutions. So welcome, Mandira. Uh, Next panelist, we have Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. He is a founder director of Empowered Citizens Initiatives. He comes up with a more than 30 years of experience in different communication skills, starting from strategy, training, research. He has worked with national and international NGOs, central and state governments. He has worked with academia. He has worked with media and corporate. So welcome, Dr. Kumar. We have next panelist, Dr. Pooja Halde, Senior Advisor, Center for Social and Behavior Change, Ashoka University. Dr. Halde has more than 20 years of experience in consumer behavior. She works with both development and private sector organizations, advises in the area of behavior sciences and consumer insights. With that, I hand it over to Sweta Prajapati, who is our program communications lead, Food, Land, Water, WRI India, to start the panel discussion.
Thanks, Mala, and a warm welcome to all the panelists. Thank you for joining us for this discussion today. So communication has been, and we've all been realizing and identifying communication as a very important lever to work around food waste issues particularly. Not so much on food loss probably at this stage, but food waste certainly. So this panel discussion, basically we would love to hear your insights on how can we look at communications as a lever for food waste reduction for various kinds of stakeholders. What kind of strategies, what kind of frameworks or learning experiences can help us look at this issue, changing this issue. So how I have sort of structured the conversation here is basically questions and answers, and we would like to kind of build on what you would be sharing. So starting with the first round of questions, Mandira, I would like to first ask you about campaigns. Why? Because when it comes to communication, the most familiar term or concept that somebody can relate with is the campaigns. But we know that a lot goes behind. So if you can share some insights on what role can campaigns play in shaping consumer behavior towards food waste reduction, and also, you know, reflect upon mass media campaigns versus localized campaigns from that kind of a perspective.
Sure, thank you, Shweta. And I'm going to start from a simple question. I think that if I asked everybody in this room whether they waste food, everybody in this room would say, of course not, never. I don't waste food. I've even heard people tell me it's a sin to waste food. And yet, if you look at the data, about 78 million tons of food waste is generated by households in India per year. Just by households. This is not HoReCa or restaurants or any of that. So there's a dissonance there. There's something not quite right when most of us identify, and we saw this when we did research before we started the work that we did, most people we spoke to said we don't waste food. And then when you started to dig into their practices and what they did, there was huge amounts of food wastage. But there was this massive disconnect between the reality and the understanding. And I think that's, to me, one of the key parts of why campaigns and what makes campaigns really useful. And to just jump back and forth a bit between your first question and your second question. And that's what makes it really important to think of campaigns beyond a traditional mass media campaign, which is, you know, one big slogan and goes around the country, and you get Amitabh Bachchan to say, "Bas, you know, food mat waste karo," you know, that kind of thing. There has been a place for it in the past. It doesn't work any longer. And it doesn't work exactly because if you want to create cultural dissonance between what people know and what people practice, you need locally relevant, very contextualized campaigns that mix methods, that mix approaches, and that are rooted in behavioral insights. So in our work, we worked in Pune, Mumbai, Kanpur, Indore. We've done various strategies to looking at behavior that generates food waste. And it's a lot of where the solution lies, especially from a communication perspective, has been a mix of looking at people's habits, what are social norms, what are the cognitive biases, and therefore building campaigns that question across these norms, but also question certain kind of learned behaviors and almost automatic behaviors. You know, like you have muscle memory, you have behaviors that become like muscle memory. And I'll give you an example of some of the different things that we did, but really one of the key focuses of how we've come to campaigning, thank you, I will finish in 2 minutes, how we come to campaigning on this issue has been, could you kind of snap that break in what people were actually doing? So for instance, we conceptualized something called dinner with strangers. And the idea was inviting a group of strangers to share a meal and conversation and bring together and create a community. But what we didn't tell them is at the end of the meal, they would show them on a scale how much wastage was caused by that meal, and then have a conversation around how many more people could have been fed with that wastage. So it started to break that understanding of where food waste happened, how it happened, and got people to really start thinking about it. Just to end, really to think about sustained change at a communication and campaign level, it really needs to be a blend. Mass media campaigns, mass media communication, localized community level, rooted in behavioral insights. You can't just ask people to not waste food. Our grandmothers have been saying that to us for years. Mine did, I'm sure most people's here did, and you say this to the next generation, that doesn't work any longer. But really looking at what allows people to create that shift from what they think to what they do. Thanks.
Thanks, Mandira. If I can ask a follow-up question on the same point, because you brought out the significance of the localized campaigns very much. So can we say that we should shift our focus towards building more such localized campaigns, and should we downplay mass media level campaigns, or is that equally important?
So if there are any big ad firms in the room, they will hold me responsible for saying that.
I don't think we have any.
But
do we?
No, I think there's a place for both. And I think something interesting that we have done across multiple campaigns is you create an umbrella idea that brings people together across an issue, right? So yes, you can create an umbrella idea that is universal, that is resonant. We've done it in health work, we've done it on gender work, we've done it on various kinds of climate work. But then within specific audiences, and there's always been that theory with campaigning, right? Your campaign must speak to your audience, your messaging must be relevant for an audience, otherwise it doesn't land. And when we build out that messaging for an audience, you have to take into account also what works with that audience. So it's not simply about just the content of the message that works, but the language that message is in, the tone of that message. Something we realized with the work that we did in Mumbai, actually, was that humor was a critical part of the messaging. And actually, even in the work that we did in Indore and Pune, that humor was critical, because otherwise messaging around waste became very preachy and people switched off. So you had to create a way to get people to engage with it without feeling guilt, without feeling like wastage was a sin, but just becoming aware of a practice and trying to then inculcate. So, you know, using the fact that you have, like we did, using the fact that you had local language communicators, local language maybe cultural references that you could take advantage of, because then it lands, it feels more real, it feels more relevant. So I think there's a place for both.
So what I'm getting is that we should look at a layered approach probably.
Absolutely.
Okay. So with that, I think then with a layered approach, we understand mass media quite a lot. What we are getting to understand is the localized campaigns, which consist of more of behavioral insights and all. So Dr. Kumar, if you can share some insights on the behavioral, how do we change the scripts, or how do we
That's a very profound question. How do we change somebody's script?
So how I'm looking at the food waste, Mandira spoke about the behaviors, and these behaviors are part of stories or narratives that we look at. So if I have to change my story and I have to reach a different ending, then what are the changes that, or what can be the changes that we can look at?
Thank you, Shweta. It's a pleasure to have you around. I remember those days when we were teaching. But I think the first thing about behavior change is understanding your audience. It starts from there. And sometimes we do not pay enough attention there. If we do not understand the mindset, behavior, barriers, challenges, norms, and sometimes even basic silliness of the behavior, it happens. If we don't understand that, put research into that, put perspective into that, and don't see it from their perspective. I have to leave my hat of a researcher, of a program manager, of a medical officer, of a policy officer. I have to leave that hat. And sometimes we are not able to do that. And that's the real problem, because I'm not able to see things from my audience's perspective. And audience also is not homogeneous. There is segments and layers of audience, and I cannot put them in one category and bracket. So one, I leave my hat. Number two, I see it from your perspective. Number three, I understand your perspective, how silly, idiotic, rational, irrational, ugly, idiotic, because that's your rationale. And I need to understand that first if I want to change the script. I cannot start with my script and then force it on you. I have to understand your script in your language, in your idiom, in your complexity and simplicity. And if I don't do that, all my campaigns, local or mass media or interaction or social media is a waste. Waste, what a word, right? So behavior change starts with the person who's actually going to do the action. करना किसने? मैंने नहीं करना है, पॉलिसी वाले ने नहीं करना है, एफएसआई ने नहीं करना है, यूएनईपी ने नहीं करना है, डब्ल्यूआरआई ने नहीं करना है, ऑडियंस ने करना है, उस पर्टिकुलर मेंबर ने करना है जिसकी बिहेवियर को हम शायद अगर नहीं समझ पाने का प्रयास भी नहीं कर रहे हैं तो बदलाव होने की संभावना तो है ही नहीं. So as Mandira said, and I'm sure Pooja will say, we have worked in various domains, and sometimes it used to be our Indore friend started IEC. I said, IEC को छोड़ दो, अभी कितने साल हो गए यार, कब तक पकड़े रहोगे? कब तक हम material सोचेंगे? Material, toolkits, TVCs, radios, jingles, now social media, now gamification, now design thinking, crap. Don't mind my word. The simple thing I'm trying to say is start with the audience. Understand them well. And if you don't understand them, don't take the next step. Because if you want to change behaviors, if you want to change lasting, sustainable behaviors, then you have to understand them more than what you think you can. And that requires a lot of effort, and sometimes we are in a hurry to make things because we have to show. We have to demonstrate. We show data. And I love and hate data. It's very easy to throw data around and has those numbers, but we do not have people understanding. And that sometimes is the basic fault. Whether you do HIV, whether you do malaria, whether you do NREGA, whether you do food or nutrition, or whether you do even sexual harassment, it starts with the person, the people. And don't forget the context. Every context and every person is different. आपको दूसरे की दृष्टि से, दूसरे के दृष्टिकोण से समझने की आवश्यकता होती है. दृष्टि करना बड़ा आसान है, कोण समझना बड़ा मुश्किल है. दृष्टि ज्ञान है, समझ है, डेटा है, बड़ा आसान है सर. किताब में पढ़ लेंगे, मैं भी पढ़ा दूंगा, आप भी पढ़ लेंगे, टीवी से भी देख लेंगे, यूट्यूब भी सिखा देगा, मंदिरा भी सिखा देगी. कोण नहीं पकड़ सकते सर. कोण पकड़ना जरूरी है. आपका कोण, मेरा कोण, आपका कोण, मेरा कोण अलग है. इसीलिए उसमें मेहनत लगती है, उसमें इंसाइट लगती है. इंसाइट बड़ा अच्छा वर्ड है. लस्सी नहीं है कि मक्खन निकाला और उसमें से मक्खन निकल गया, इंसाइट निकल के आ जाए. जब तक आप उस पर डूबेंगे नहीं, समझेंगे नहीं, उस तरफ नहीं जाएंगे, तब तक आप समझ नहीं पाएंगे. जब तक आप समझ नहीं पाएंगे, आप स्क्रिप्ट तो क्या, उसका पहला अक्षर भी नहीं बदल पाएंगे.
Thank you, sir. So I think you've actually tied this very nicely with the next question that I was about to ask Pooja, because we are now talking about unpacking the layers. Unpacking the layers would mean research. So here it comes to, we come to communication research. So Pooja, if you can continue the conversation with, yes.
So yes, to your point, doing any kind of behavior change, communication, any work requires some hard work. We've done some of that work, so I'd love to share some insights from two of these pieces of work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. So the first one is where we looked at around 10 low carbon lifestyle behaviors, one of them being reducing food waste. The others were in mobility, energy, and so on and so forth. And there were a couple of insights that we got on why food waste continues to remain high. And I won't go into the detail, which you can find on our website, but I'll talk about 3 or 4 points which stood out to us. So the first is something that Mandra already talked about, which is that there is a gross underestimation on how much food I'm wasting. And that's a big problem, because if I don't even know this is an issue, why would I want to solve it? So this underestimation of how much food being wasted, that's one big barrier. The second is that, any person at any point of time has multiple goals. And when you're putting food on the table, you have goals such as being a provider, coming up across as being someone who's done well in their lives, providing good nutritious food for their kids, and so on and so forth. And sometimes these goals will collide with forced food wastage, in the sense that you will say, okay, fine, a small amount is getting wasted, but another goal is being met, which is that, I'm able to provide for my family, etc., etc. So there is, and sometimes we have this term in behavior science called moral licensing, which is like, because a bigger goal is being met, it's okay if, some small amount is being wasted, right? So that happens. Of course, there are, and I saw it in the video as well, there are misconceptions around storage, which is how long, and in fact, we found so much disagreement within household members itself on what is, the right shelf life of objects, and how for food items, and so on and so forth. So there are misconceptions. And then, of course, last but not the least, there is a lack of planning, portion control when meals are being cooked. And that's also because, it's not such an easy task. Without certain tools that we'll talk about later, it's not so easy to completely be able to exactly make the right amount of food. So I think these were 4 or 5 barriers that came out. There was another piece of work, and I'm going to talk about, which actually gives us the good news. So these are some, these barriers are big, but there's a piece where we actually went to about 3,000 Indians across the different cities, and we did this urban climate norm survey where we wanted to understand, for 15 such behaviors around climate, what are the norms. And out of the 15 behaviors we looked at, reducing food waste was the strongest norm that existed as far as climate-related behaviors are concerned. So other behaviors could be like, I should use 5-star ACs, or I should use public transport, etc., etc. Out of all of those 15 behaviors, the topmost, with 80% thinking that it's a norm, was around reducing food waste. What does it mean that it's a norm? It means that it's not the done thing, that other people are not wasting food. They don't think food wastage is good. And by the way, I will be judged if they see that I am wasting food. And that's actually very good news, because in so many other climate behaviors where norms do not exist, creating new norms can be so hard. But this is a behavior where norms exist because of cultural factors and so on and so forth. So that gives us a pathway for behavior change. How can we amplify those norms? And perhaps later I can talk a little bit about some of those strategies as well. So just to conclude on the barriers, there is underestimation, there are many other issues around storage, etc., etc. And also moral licensing, as I talked about, but the norms is there. People do think that others will judge them for wasting food, and I think that gives us a good pathway to change.
That's interesting. So Luna, have these norms helped you when you looked at the canteens?
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks Shweta for your question. I think I can relate to each of my fellow members, because at Sodexo we have started working on reducing waste. We in fact have a public commitment made of reducing food waste by 50% by the end of this year. And we started our journey in 2020. It's almost 5 years now, where from 20 sites, just to give a little brief about Sodexo, we are a multinational organization which are into integrated facility management, which includes food services, facility management of hard and soft services, and including technical services. So we operate in different and various sectors in the market. It includes corporate, education, healthcare, energy and resources. And when I say the number of sites, it means that the sites where we are operating on our client premises. So we started our journey with 20 sites. And today we have been able to implement a program which is named as a Waste Watch program, right? And I think the most essential or the behavioral change which we were able to bring in, I think I'll just summarize into 4 points. The first one is management commitment. I think that plays a very, very, very crucial role. Like Mandira mentioned, awareness and campaign, that's the second piece. The third is the operational shift or the changes in operational. And finally, so you mentioned that, data is good and bad, but I think data did help us. So we also have a smart technology. We have our global partner named LeanPath, with whom we are working. So when I elaborate each point, I think the idea, it's still a struggle. I will not say that we are there. But yeah, these 4 points have helped us move further and further, understanding the client, understanding the consumer, so maybe decreasing the size of the plate. I mean, it's a very, very, very small thing, but it makes a lot of impact. The portion size, the ladles we use, right? All these have impacted us in a big way and in a positive way. Yeah. When it comes to awareness, I think it's not only consumer, but as an organization, even our employees should be able to understand, why it is important, what is the reason, and how are we supposed to do it. So all these put together, I think we've been able to do and progress where we are today. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Luna. Sounds a very successful initiative. So just want to understand the practical side of the story. How did people respond or rather react to when you began this initiative?
Okay, like I said, we are still in the journey, which means it's not easy, right? So if I am changing the plate size, there is an objection from the consumer saying, "Arey, plate chota kar diya, you're trying to save money." Right? That's the first mindset. Even today, we had a nice elaborate buffet laid out for us, and we all were quite happy with that. But the fact remains that, the buffet also is one of the places or source where the food waste is on a higher side, right? So especially for the education segment where we have kids, from buffet, we've moved to serving them. That has helped us in reducing the waste. So again, as a child, I'm not very happy if I'm not able to take it, right? Whether I want to eat, don't want to eat, but I want that. So that behavioral change is tough. But yeah, we are taking baby steps. We are progressing there. Yeah,
Thanks, Luna, thanks. So it really helps to understand, practically when we start, it's very easy to come up with ideas.
Yes.
And food waste is a topic that each one of us relate to, and every person in a minute can give me 3 solutions. So, but at the same time, when we actually start operationalizing them, this is the challenge.
Yeah, and in fact, when we began with our awareness sessions, trust me, getting people in that room was itself a challenge. Arey, kya aayegi, 45 minutes pakaegi and jaegi. That's a mindset, right? So to change the mindset, to get them there, it's been a journey for us.
So if I can ask, how did you do it? Because
yeah, so we, very simple, we took the approach of incentivizing, so appreciating. We also have, today also we are running a campaign in India named as Waste Watch Goal Olympics, where we've made a commitment of reducing 10% in X number of days. And the winners will be declared, they'll be called to the head office, they'll be honored, they'll be given a cash prize. So all that has definitely helped us. And like I said, the management push, that's extremely important. So it doesn't happen if the management is not committed to that.
Of course. So, sorry, I'm just taking a little more time to unpack these insights, because management, when you say, is again made of certain people. So
That's
what
right.
kind of push you faced when you put this on the plate?
Okay, so when I say management, it's the top-down approach.
Yeah, because I'm
where,
sure, sorry, because I'm sure these must be the institutionalized
Right.
norms that you were dealing with.
Right.
So how did you?
So approaching the senior most person, talking to the senior most person, making the person come on board with us to what we are trying to convey, that's very, very important. Because once the boss has agreed, by default, everybody is going to agree, right? So yeah, that's how it is.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So with that, I have a question for everyone, if you can help me understand that. So now we understand that while we are talking about consumers largely here, shifting mindsets mean public, people. But clearly there, if we start categorizing or start looking closely, then these are people in different roles. They're playing different roles in the picture, like people who are comprising the management, people who are eating inside the canteens, for example, or people who are serving. Because the moment you ask that we need extra people to help us serve the food instead of people taking them on their own, that adds another layer of operationalization. So question that I'm trying to ask is that now, since we see these multiple stakeholders as part of the public that we are trying to work with, so what kind of either research or communication strategy and steps can help us?
Okay.
I'm happy.
Okay. Now, it's a very interesting question. What Luna mentioned was working in a controlled environment. And it's not easy, but comparatively easy, right? You convince the top boss, and I wouldn't say 99% of your work is done, but 50% of your work is done. But still, there's a lot of challenge there. But I think the challenge lies in working in an uncontrolled environment. Food courts. Go to food courts and check out what happens there. Go to marriages or birthday parties or even what's called death parties. You know? Barsi. Huh? Tervi. And things like that. Go to a hotel, go to a restaurant, go to a hostel mess. I see students post-lunch what happens out there. I'm saying working in my behavior in an uncontrolled situation where my boss or my chain down the lane is not watching me or not going to say me anything makes me much more vulnerable to the food offender, so to say, which I would be doing. Now, I am my own at that point. My boss is not telling me, oh, there's no director around there. Boss dekh raha hai, upar wala sab dekh raha hai. So the question there is, let me suggest a very simple strategy. For example, when you go to an open environment, whether it's a food court or any other such situation, keep no bins. And you have to pay the equivalent amount of food you're wasting if you want a bin. आपको 500 रुपए देने पड़ेंगे अगर आपको food waste करना है. Why keep a bin? Because you are inviting people to throw that food and waste there around there. No bins in the food place. Food court has no bins. Tell me who will go there. उसके ऊपर लिखा हुआ है यहाँ पर कुछ भी डाला तो 500 रुपए देने पड़ेंगे. चलाओ कैंपेन बंद करो. So the issue is very simple. Either you work with normative. Pooja talked about external. Large part of your barriers were external. There are internal barriers. जब मैं किसी शादी में जाता हूँ तो मैं सिर्फ खाना खाने नहीं जाता हूँ. वहाँ पर 121 व्यंजन रखे हुए हैं. मेरे घर में तो 2 ही बनते हैं. तो वहाँ पे तो मैं ज़्यादा डालूंगा ही ना. You are inviting me to overeat. You are inviting me to put over in my plate and obviously I end up wasting. और also फिर मेरा उस बंदे से खुंदक भी होती है ना, आज दिखाऊंगा बेटा तेरा 4 प्लेट तो मैं ही करके जाऊंगा because एक प्लेट के 2,500 रुपए तो तू दे ही रहा है ना. So there are barriers which are irrational, internal, and we sometimes do not research that because they are beyond what's called logic. And we are all supposedly logical and rational people. But people do not work with rationality or logic. People work with emotion and with baggages and with spur of the moment decisions, right? And also around you. So I think we need to do research more into people. And I come back to my first point again. We still do not understand people's motives, barriers, drivers, and incentives to be able to do what we are expecting them to do.
I can actually take from that, which is why a good campaign, one that I'll take the challenge design, but a good campaign would be where it's not simply driving an individual to make certain behaviors, but it's actually creating and enabling an environment where those behaviors become easier. So it is about the size of the plate. Is it about the size of a portion? It is about the size of how you buy things. You know, it should not 1 kilo bags, but 250 grams, or things like that. It's about thinking through how, on the one hand, you change individual behaviors, and on the other hand, you create the infrastructure or the enabling environment which is setting up that person for success on those individual behaviors, because you're absolutely right. If you don't do that, the individual behavior change is irrelevant, because the minute you go to the wedding, you're going to overfill your plate and waste.
Okay, so I'm actually just going to build on this, so this is great. So you talked about many stakeholders, and see, when we, across all climate-related work that we've done, actually, you know, when I sat down and looked at the work, I felt like there were 3 common strategies or themes that actually emerged when it comes to behavior change. The first one, I think Dr. Not Kapoor, Dr. Kumar mentioned, is that often when we want behaviors to change around climate, we talk too much about climate, and that often doesn't resonate because climate change and such as goals are too abstract and they're not immediate, they don't resonate. So the first point is, can we link the behavior to a goal that actually matters? You know, what is the hook? What matters to me? And in various different behaviors, that hook will be very different. So for example, we were doing some work on waste segregation, and there we found that more than talking about the landfills and so on and so forth, the methane and so on, we talked about reduction of diseases, especially vector-borne diseases, if you segregate your waste properly, right? So that is a more immediate goal that can resonate. So first thing around research is that understanding, you know, what is the goal? It's not about preaching, it's not about taking a moralistic tone, it's about, it could be around Indian values, it could be an economic argument for some stakeholders, it could be meant, it could be pride, you know, in running a household. So we have to think about what is that hook. The second thing is, which I mentioned earlier also, that's amplifying the norms. Okay, again, doing campaigns which are norm-based, which talk about what are others doing, what is expected behavior, and there are many ways to do it. One example is, you know, for example, using children as vectors for change. Again, work where you change the, you teach this to the kids, and then they go at home and they tell their parents, you know, food wastage is wrong. Something we saw, for example, in Delhi when we wanted to ban crackers. Kids have been taught that. They come and shame you if you try and buy crackers. So there are many ways to change norms, but this is one way. Or even showing, you know, what neighbors are doing through RWA WhatsApp groups, for example. There are ways of amplifying, making the norms, you know, more salient, that it's, you know, nobody's wasting food, you don't be the exception, and so on and so forth. So that's, and the third is something that Mandira said, that no behavior can happen if it is difficult. So simplifying information processes is absolutely key. And this can come in various forms. She talked a few things about structurally, you know, the environment can be simplified. It can also be, you know, the packaging, labeling innovations that we do, which make it very clear what shelf lives are, you know, tell you what the portion size is, maybe packaging which is portion sized based so that you don't overcook. But it can also be things like, you know, providing some heuristics and tips to people on how to improve shelf life in a fridge. I mean, there are, you know, there are ways of storing as well which, you know, can improve shelf life. So again, can you make it easier? Can you make it easier for people to compost, for example? So thinking about simplification of information and processes, that would be the third. So if I had to sum up the 3 strategies, is linking it to a goal that matters, building or shifting norms, amplifying norms, and then the third I would say is that to make that behavior absolutely simple.
Just want to add, can we stop calling it food waste? Because the moment you call it food waste, I have my red flag or my gut churning around that I'm doing something dirty or bad. Or I'm giving an example of energy, for example. We work with AEEE, energy efficiency. They call it energy efficiency. If you run the AC at 24, you're saving energy, right? And that saved energy becomes energy generated. It's a similar equivalent process. They don't call it waste, they call it energy efficiency. The moment you call it waste, it gives me a dirty taste and feel in my mouth, in my head, in my visual. It's not waste. You're also going to recycle and give it to someone. How is that waste? Why call it waste? I mean, that's a bad labeling. Just because everybody says so, maybe you can call it so. Let's think about a different way of communicating that food you are not using or probably recycling is not waste. And that will probably change the imagination or the association with this whole idea, and that might give you a positive vibe to do certain things. Maybe at each plate in a restaurant or a place, you have a plate which is written, these are no waste plates, versus plain white plates. Do that experiment and see how many people pick a white plate at that moment. So I think you have to be innovative to think about what nudges or stimuli or actions or triggers what you want around. And that's why I'm saying keep it simpler, easier.
I wanted to add one more last thing and then, sorry. I think there's also one piece that we're slightly glossing over or missing, especially when it comes to individual and at the household level. As long as waste and the management of whether you call it food waste or whether it's food saving or food recycling lies solely with women, it further burdens women who are already burdened with many, many things. And I don't want to turn this conversation into care economy and gender, but I think there's a very important intersection that needs to be discussed, because this is something that came up time and time again with us, which is that you're managing what's coming in, you're managing what's getting fed, you're managing all of those pieces, and something falls off the table, and very often it is the composting, or it's just easier to just, that cabbage looks a bit off, throw it rather than, so those things happen. And so addressing some of that is also key to this piece as well.
Thanks for adding that last bit, Mandira, because I can relate very well. Why? Because we are working with Pune Municipal Corporation and Indore, as you know, very closely on food waste reduction at source. So in Pune, we were visiting very recently, and we were trying to understand the Swachh initiative that they are working on, and we were trying to sort of unpack and understand what role these waste, because it's a very strong, very powerful union of waste pickers. So how can they help us? Because they brought in a paradigm shift in waste management in Pune. Can they play the similar role when it comes to food waste? So we were speaking with some of them, and what they shared is, so a woman was sharing, I just casually was asking her that, how much waste, how much food do you discard every day? And she said, रोज 2-3 रोटी तो बची जाती हैं. अब वो क्यों बची जाती हैं? Because मेरा बेटा कभी-कभी जॉब से ऑफिस के बाद बाहर खाना खा लेता है, तो मुझे नहीं बताता है कि मैं घर आके खाना नहीं खाऊंगा, वो बच जाता है. तो she says कि मुझे लेकिन बना के भी रखना ज़रूरी है, अगर नहीं खा के आया तो मैंने उनको बोला कि ऐसा पॉसिबल नहीं है कि आपका बेटा आपको इन्फॉर्म कर दे. अब वो खुद ही बनाना तो बहुत ही ज़्यादा एक्सपेक्टेशन हो जाएगी, मगर बता दे कम से कम कि अगर खा लिया है तो. So the thing is that this woman who was sharing this situation with me, she has this situation at her hand every day. And if I put the entire onus on her to manage her kitchen, it's simply unfair. She can't keep hammering her son every day कि मुझे फ़ोन करके बताओ ये तुमने खा लिया कि नहीं खाया, बनाऊँ या नहीं बनाऊँ. So which basically made me realize that, when it comes to household level food waste, talking about kitchens basically limit the role or put the onus on one particular person who can be a man or a woman, or any other person who's managing the kitchen, but essentially everyone in the family has to play their role. So thanks for bringing that out. And now listening to all of you, in my head, I'm already sort of, churning the brain with multiple elements that we can put together if we want to look at the next action item. So here is research, and I'm listening. Pooja, you mentioned something very useful and critical. We need to amplify the positive norms. So with research, when we understand our audience, what sir was saying earlier, that we need to understand our audience, what are the existing norms or existing behaviors in them, if we can look out for positive norms, existing norms, and if we can amplify them, and then our campaigning or our communication, if we can focus on building an enabling environment, picking this up from Mandira. So Mandira very rightly said, like, the campaign, it comes to, okay, this is our audience, consumer is our audience, let's just develop our messaging. For example, this video was developed particularly for a very individualistic action. But often the enabling conditions are not present. So which sort of touches back to your institutional initiative. So I'm listening to all of this, and this ties back to a much complex and a layered sort of and I'm still talking in terms of campaign because I'm a communication person. That's all I can do. So, but if at the same time, what I can do is I can talk to all these different people, and I can look at them as different kind of stakeholders instead of clubbing them together as audience or public. So that's one. So to summarize or to maybe close the discussion for today, this is an ongoing, endless sort of a passionate subject. But if I can ask you a common question, that what is that one lever that you would like to highlight? Can be a communication, can be a non-communication lever. Of course, we'll start with you.
I think having a strong policy is very, very important.
Please elaborate.
When I say this, like sir mentioned, शादियाँ हो रही हैं, funerals हो रहे हैं, there is food which is wasted. I'm sure today also we have wasted some amount of food here. So how are we going to address that? Like sir said, bins nikal do. So we've actually tried it. We have removed our bins from the sites, but we haven't been able to levy any kind of penalties because of definite reasons, and I'm sure I don't want to spell them out here. But yeah, I think having those penalties by the government, implementing it strongly will definitely help us curb this and control this. Yeah, thanks.
So, agreed. I think, and it's very difficult, Shweta, when you say, give me that one, because we're communication people. We're not going to give you the one. We're going to give you a layered approach. But I think to me, in doing the waste work that we've done in partnership with you and with others, I think one of the things that has become more and more clear to me is that this is so multi-layered, and it's multi-layered not simply at a general policy level, but it's multi-layered at a city level. Because from what our experiences have looked like in Kanpur, in Indore, in Mumbai, in Pune, have all looked very different, and have looked very different based on where those particular cities are in their own journeys around addressing these practices and the different routes they've taken in terms of how they've worked with waste segregators, how RWAs work, all of those pieces. But I do come back to the policy and the communication piece have to go hand in hand to create the enabling environment. I'm always a little worried about punitive actions because so my background is from the health sector, and in the health sector hasn't always worked. It has worked occasionally, but punitive doesn't always work. And what happens when you eventually remove that punitive action? Do people switch back to a behavior? And so a longer term and sometimes more sustainable way is actually rewarding good behavior rather than punishing bad behavior. I think, again, these are all different parts of the puzzle that we would have to work on together, but largely also creating, and I go back to what I said previously, creating that enabling environment that allows me to take those good behaviors, that actually rewards me for those good behaviors so that I'm not being punished, but rather I'm finding the incentive to keep taking positive behaviors that results in some sort of behavior change.
Okay, I'll just keep it short. If you see food in a different way and not just as food, as probably we used to see it before, food is not just calories or nutrition. If you start seeing it from that perspective, maybe it'll change my mindset and probably at individual level or at a family level or a student level or an institution level, I'll start seeing and behaving things differently.
Okay, so I'll say two things. One is that the thing I mentioned about amplifying positive norms, I think we should take that to advantage. But I think because, again, Indians don't want to waste food, and they also think it's wrong. But I think one thing which is missing is to provide channels, infrastructurally provide them channels of what to do with food which will get wasted, because we cannot always do this so perfectly. So and that's not a behavioral communication idea, but it's infrastructurally, how to make it easier to donate that food, to repurpose it for what, and so on and so forth. I think that combined with amplifying the norms which already exist.
Thank you so much. So, there was a difficult question that I had in mind, but I think also we are out of time. So I will not ask. I really wanted to ask, I wish I could ask, give me that one silver bullet framework. So I would just like to thank you very much, and also with a small token of respect and love. Not so much of food in this, but
And I request
before
all the
we-
panelists
Yeah.
and moderator for the stay back for the group photograph.